Behind every great defense in Formula One is a faster car asking the same question: where do I pass? Sometimes the answer is the inside of turn 4. Sometimes it's the braking zone at the end of the straight. Sometimes it's the second chicane, or the hairpin, or the long corner where the attacker carries more speed and the defender's tires are 4/10ths slower than they were 20 laps ago. And sometimes, 10 times in the history of this sport that we're about to show you, the answer is nowhere. Each story on this list gets harder. The car behind gets faster. The gap gets smaller. And by the time we reach number 1, you'll understand why the greatest defense in Formula One history isn't the longest, or the most dramatic, or even the most statistically improbable. It's the one that changed what two drivers thought they were capable of. Lap 44, Sepang, Malaysia, 2013. The word for what Mark Webber is doing right now is waiting. He is leading a Formula One race in a Red Bull in front of his teammate Sebastian Vettel, and the team has already transmitted the code: multi-21, hold positions, car 2 ahead of car 1. Webber is car 2. Webber is leading. He has turned his engine down. He is managing his tires. He has done what the code asked of him, which is to believe this race is already over. Vettel has other ideas. What follows is several laps of wheel-to-wheel combat inside the same team. A 3-time world champion going for a move his own race engineer is telling him to abort against a teammate whose only crime was trusting the agreement. Webber defended, not symbolically. Actually, he held the inside of turn 4 on multiple attempts. He gave Vettel no clean line, no late apex, no gap that could be committed to without contact. He made it as difficult as it could be made in equal machinery. And then, because Vettel was faster and more committed and had simply decided the code did not apply to him, the pass happened anyway. This is the betrayal defense. The defense where the threat comes from inside your own garage, where the team radio is telling you to hold position while the car behind you is ignoring the same instruction. Webber didn't yield. He was taken. On the podium, he stood beside Vettel and said 4 words that are still quoted a decade later: "Not bad for a number 2 driver." Losing a race you were told you'd won is a specific kind of devastation. What makes Webber's defense notable isn't the laps. It's the fact that he raced it all against someone who had just decided the contract didn't matter. That's not just driving. That's character. Same equipment, same team, a betrayal at race speed. Now imagine the car behind you is genuinely, verifiably, sector by sector faster. And the only thing keeping it behind you is your ability to occupy exactly the right piece of tarmac at exactly the right moment for an entire race. Lap 37, Marina Bay Street Circuit, Singapore, 2010, night. The PAM. Precision. Defense has one rule: don't give them the line. Not once. Not in 50 laps. Not when you're tired, not when the tires are degrading, not when the attacker's pace is visible in your mirrors and in your sector splits and in the tone of your race engineer's voice. Fernando Alonso is leading in a Ferrari. Sebastian Vettel is behind him in a Red Bull that has shown all weekend long a pace advantage in specific corners. Red Bull chose to pit on the identical lap as Ferrari, gambling that a faster stop could buy track position. Ferrari's mechanics were immaculate. Alonso emerged ahead. And then, for the remaining 25 laps, the defense began in earnest on a circuit that offers almost no forgiveness for imprecision. The walls at Marina Bay are 6 inches from the side pods. Leaving yourself exposed into a slow corner on this track isn't a calculated risk. It is a retirement. Alonso gave Vettel nothing, not a sniff of the inside at the chicanes. Not an imperfect exit that could be exploited down the pit straight. He crossed the finish line with Vettel 0.29 seconds behind him after 61 laps. An entire race's worth of championship weight pressure, absorbed without a single mistake. Precision, lap after lap. For 61 of them, same quality of attacker, same championship pressure. Now take that scenario and give the defender tires that have no business still being on a Formula One car in a car worth a fraction of what the leader is driving against the same quality of driver. Lap 46, Sepang, Malaysia, 2012. This is the missed opportunity. Defense, which is the hardest kind to watch and the hardest kind to respect, because it asks you to admire something that almost happened, something that had no right to almost happen, and then didn't, and the reason it didn't tells you everything. Sergio Perez is driving a Sauber, a midfield car. The race has already been red flagged for rain, restarted and chewed through multiple tire compounds. His hard compound tires, taken after the restart, have found a grip window on the drying circuit that nobody, including Sauber, fully anticipated. Fernando Alonso is in the lead Ferrari ahead of him. With 10 laps remaining, the gap is under 2 seconds. The broadcast team is describing it live with audible disbelief. 2 seconds. 1. The gap falls further. Perez is the fastest car on the circuit. With 6 laps to go, he runs slightly wide at a late corner, touches the curb, goes onto the dirty side of the track, and loses 5 seconds in one moment. Window closed. He finishes second. He said afterward the win was possible. He said he knew he had to get Alonso soon because he was losing his front tires. He touched the curb and it was over. Here's what matters. Alonso, in a car that was supposed to be significantly faster than whatever a Sauber could produce on that day, had been unable to pull away from a driver on dying tires in a midfield car. The defense being described here belongs to Alonso, managing a Ferrari on a drying track with a Sauber closing at a pace that the numbers said was impossible, and finding no answer except to hold smooth and hope the tires of the car behind him expired first. They expired 6 laps too late. Now add the one variable that makes every calculation in Formula One collapse. Lap 1. Circuit de Catalunya, Barcelona, 1996. Mastery. Looks different in the rain because in the rain there is no data to trust, no model that holds, no setup that delivers what it promised in dry practice. The rain is the great equalizer. Except it isn't, because the rain exposes something that the dry cannot measure, which is the difference between what a driver knows and what a driver feels. Michael Schumacher started third. He fell to 6th off the line with a clutch problem, and then he did something systematic and unhurried and increasingly astonishing. He began working through the field in a Ferrari that in any conventional analysis was not the fastest car. Passed Berger by lap 4, passed Alesi by lap 9, leading by lap 12. And from lap 12 onward, he drove away from the entire field as if they were competing in a different race in a different weather system. He finished 45 seconds ahead of second place. He lapped every driver outside the podium. His fastest lap was 2.2 seconds quicker than anyone else managed all afternoon. The defense here was not against one attacker. It was against the fundamental premise that a car this far down the performance hierarchy should be capable of winning. The Ferrari F310 had no right to be that fast in those conditions. Schumacher made the conditions irrelevant. This was the race that gave him the name Regenmeister, Rainmaster. And watching it back, knowing the result, you still cannot quite explain how the gap got so large so fast. That's what mastery looks like when it has no competition. The next story doesn't involve rain. It involves 2 waves of attack from 2 of the fastest drivers in the world, at the circuit where the slipstream alone should be enough to win the battle. Lap 22. Autodromo Nazionale Monza, Italy, 2019. The Palanums Aggression on Rump. Defense works differently from the precision defense. The precision defense keeps the door closed quietly, early, without confrontation. The aggression defense goes to the limit of what the regulations permit and stays there. And the driver executing it needs to know exactly where that limit is, because the margin between legal and penalized on this kind of move is measured in inches. Charles Leclerc is 21 years old. He is leading the Italian Grand Prix in a Ferrari in front of a crowd that has not seen a Ferrari win here in 9 years, and Lewis Hamilton in a Mercedes is behind him on fresher, faster tires. Hamilton had pitted 1 lap earlier and came out on mediums while Leclerc took harder rubber. The pace advantage was real and visible. For the next 20 laps, Hamilton closed repeatedly and launched 2 serious attacks. The first, on lap 23, ended with Leclerc crowding Hamilton into the Roggia chicane, getting physical at the entry, pushing the Mercedes partly onto the runoff. Leclerc received a warning flag. The stewards reviewed it. No penalty. And Leclerc understood in that moment exactly how much space he was permitted to occupy. He occupied that much space, and not 1 centimeter less, for the remainder of the race. Hamilton described it afterward as dangerous driving. He was not wrong about what it was. He was wrong about the outcome. Bottas eventually inherited the chase after Hamilton made a mistake with 11 laps to go. Got to within half a second of Leclerc on the final lap and still couldn't find a way through. Leclerc crossed the line 0.835 seconds ahead. 21 years old. Ferrari's first Monza win in 9 years, against 2 Mercedes, by using the rulebook as precisely as he used the racing line, finding the exact edge of what was permitted and refusing to retreat from it. Now we go back 30 years to a defense on a different street circuit against the fastest car the sport had produced at that point. Monaco, 1992, the psychological defense is the deepest kind, because it isn't really about the gap or the tires or the corner. It's about making the driver behind you believe, at some level below conscious thought, that no matter what they try, they are going to find the same answer. Not today, not here, not against this driver. Ayrton Senna is leading the race in a McLaren. Nigel Mansell is behind him in a Williams FW14B that had won 5 consecutive races entering Monaco. 5. Without losing a championship point. Active suspension, extraordinary aerodynamic balance, more power than anything else on the grid. On any circuit other than this one, in any conditions other than these, Mansell should have been through Senna within a handful of laps. For 70 laps, Senna managed everything. Tires, pace, the psychological weight of knowing that the most dominant car in Formula One was behind him, in the hands of a driver who desperately wanted what he had. Then with 7 laps remaining, Mansell pitted for a suspected puncture and rejoined 5 seconds back on fresh rubber. A car 2 seconds a lap faster in clear air. Within 3 laps, he was on Senna's gearbox. Mansell probed Rascasse. He showed his nose into Saint-Devote. He looked for the gap through the chicane after the tunnel, and each time Senna was there. Not moving aggressively, being there. Occupying the space before the attack could be constructed. Drifting wide through the chicane not because he lost the car, but because he was sitting in exactly the position that made Mansell's move impossible to complete. They crossed the line 0.25 seconds apart. Senna said afterward that those final laps on worn tires against that machinery were like driving on ice. 7 laps. He won by 0.2. The psychological defense doesn't just hold the position. It makes the attacker doubt whether the position was ever genuinely available. 7 laps. The most dominant car the sport had built to that point. 1 on worn tires. The next story is 11 laps, in a modern era, with DRS and data, against a 7-time champion on fresh rubber. Budapest, Hungary, 2021, the bounce experience. Defense is what happens when a driver has spent 20 years memorizing every mistake an attacker can make and every space an attacker needs to make it. It is not athletic. It is not aggressive. It is closer to a chess player who has studied your openings for longer than you've been playing. Fernando Alonso is 40 years old, in his first season back after 2 years away, driving for Alpine, and he has placed himself between Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes and his own teammate Esteban Ocon, who is leading the race and fighting for his first Formula One victory. Hamilton is on fresh medium tires. Alonso is on older rubber in a car that is slower on every meaningful metric. Hamilton needs to pass him. Hamilton is, by this point in the season, the most successful Formula One driver in history by the numbers. Hamilton said afterward that Alonso gave him hell. Alonso used turn 2 as his instrument, placing the Alpine at the corner exit in a way that denied Hamilton the cutback for turn 3 or a clean run into turn 4. Not once, lap after lap. They made contact on lap 63 hard enough that both drivers registered it. Alonso did not move. He was passed on lap 65. Not on lap 55 or 58 or 61, on lap 65. Hamilton had been within striking distance since lap 54, 11 laps. Ocon won his first race. Alonso, having surrendered the position only when physically overtaken by a car that found the one move he couldn't close, drove away having demonstrated something the paddock had suspected but never quite seen confirmed at this level. The spatial understanding that allows a driver to defend doesn't diminish the way speed does. At 40, Alonso's ability to identify and occupy the exact piece of track an attacker requires was as complete as it had ever been. 11 laps, against the most decorated driver in the sport's history, in a midfield car. The next story is 13 laps, against the driver who held that record before Hamilton. Imola, Italy, April 24, 2005. The Saychat architectural Saudi car. Defense. The one that isn't reacting to what the attacker is doing, but is instead building structures out of track geometry that make the attack impossible before it begins, is the rarest kind. Most drivers defend well by reacting quickly. Alonso, in the closing laps of the 2005 San Marino Grand Prix, defended by thinking 3 corners ahead of a 7-time world champion who had started the day 13th on the grid. Michael Schumacher had spent 49 laps working through the field in a Ferrari producing more raw power than anything else on circuit that weekend. By lap 50, he was on Alonso's gearbox. 13 laps left in a faster car. What followed has been analyzed by engineers and historians for 20 years. Alonso used the Renault's traction advantage out of the Tosa hairpin to close down the straight before Schumacher could generate a meaningful slipstream run. He positioned the car at Acqua Minerale such that the outside looked available until it wasn't, and the moment it became unavailable, the straight that followed was already compromised for an attack. At one point, Schumacher drew genuinely alongside at Piratella and found no space, not because Alonso moved on him, because the door had been closed 2 corners earlier. They crossed the line 0.2 seconds apart. Schumacher's comment, "He didn't make a single mistake." That sentence from that driver about a defense that lasted 13 laps in a faster car is the most complete evaluation of what happened. It is not admiration. It is recognition. One competitor identifying in another a quality he understands because he has built a career on exactly that quality and finding it present in full at the highest moment it could have been tested. It was the moment the sport understood a new kind of driver had arrived. And it was, though no one fully appreciated this yet, the last time Michael Schumacher would genuinely contend for a world championship. Dijon, France, July 1st, 1979, the Asher Instinct. Defense, the one that has no plan, no architecture, no psychological strategy, because there is no time for any of those things, is what happens when 2 drivers are moving faster than thought and the only thing operating is the purest competitive reflex either of them has ever produced. Jean-Pierre Jabouille won this race, the first victory ever for a turbocharged engine in Formula 1. Almost nobody talks about it. Because of what was happening behind him, Gilles Villeneuve was fighting for second place against René Arnoux in a Ferrari on tires that had been working hard since the halfway point, against a Renault with turbo power and clearly superior straight-line speed. Arnoux had started 9th. He had worked his way up. With 2 laps remaining, he went ahead. What follows cannot be adequately described. It can only be reported. Arnoux takes second. Villeneuve comes back. They trade positions through the same corners multiple times. They make contact. Actual wheel-to-wheel contact at racing speed, not glancing, not incidental. And both cars remain on the road. They run side by side through corners with one racing line and find a way to share it that should not be physically possible. On the penultimate lap, Arnoux' engine splutters and Villeneuve reclaims the lead. On the final lap, Arnoux comes back. Villeneuve crosses the line 0.24 seconds ahead. For second place, Villeneuve described it as his greatest memory of Grand Prix racing. Not his victories, not his poles, not the adulation of circuits across Europe. 2 laps for second place at Dijon that he could not fully explain and said he would not trade for anything. Both men shook hands and were photographed afterward smiling in a way that made clear they had both survived something they recognized as extraordinary and were entirely at peace with how close it had been. Every serious defensive battle in the decades since carries some trace of what happened in those 2 laps, not because no defense since has been more technically accomplished, but because no defense has ever looked so completely like 2 people who forgot, for a few minutes, that crashing was a consequence of what they were doing. 2 laps, the most famous in the sport's history. Number 1 was not famous for 2 laps. Monaco, 2007. The Piant Authority. Defense is the one that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't produce radio drama or spectacular contact or footage that goes viral on replay. What it produces is a sequence of laps where a faster car is consistently, quietly, systematically denied the space it needs, and where the driver doing the denying is doing so while being asked to absorb something that would have broken the composure of most competitors. Fernando Alonso, Lewis Hamilton, same team, McLaren. Hamilton is 22 years old in his first season of Formula 1, and he has spent the 5 races prior to Monaco doing something no one in the paddock genuinely predicted, matching and in certain corners, outpacing a 2-time world champion who came to McLaren specifically because this was a car capable of delivering a 3rd title. The relationship inside that garage was under strain before Monaco. What happened at Monaco made it structurally irreversible. At Monaco, there is almost nowhere to pass. The circuit is a sequence of corridors, some barely wide enough for 2 Formula 1 cars to coexist at speed. The driver ahead controls not just their own position, but the geometry of what follows. Get the exit of Rascasse right, track out to the wall at exactly the correct point, and the car behind has no angle into Anthony Nogis. It is not luck. It is not the car. It is knowledge of where to be, and the will to be there. every single lap. Alonso had won at Monaco. He understood the circuit as a defensive instrument in a way that most drivers who spend their preparation time identifying where to attack never fully develop. And for every lap of the 2007 Monaco Grand Prix, he denied Hamilton the space, not aggressively, precisely. Hamilton found the same answer every time he looked. The door was not open. A car positioned with surgical exactness in exactly the space that needed to exist for an attack to become possible. Hamilton could not find the move. He finished second. Now consider what Alonso was being asked to absorb while all of this was happening. He was being asked by the competitive reality of that McLaren garage to accept that a 22-year-old in his debut season had arrived at his level without the learning curve that development at this altitude normally requires. His sponsors, his team, his championship were all being affected by a situation that had no precedent. And his answer to all of it, the politics, the pressure, the unprecedented challenge from inside his own team, was Monaco. A flawless race. A defense that required no overtaking, no error from the car behind, no mechanical failure, just authority. The quiet, complete authority of a driver who understood his circuit, understood his car, and refused to give away the one thing he still controlled. Hamilton won the championship that year by 1 point. And looking back across every lap of that season, every strategic call, every point dropped, every moment of political noise, Monaco was the moment the sport understood something it would spend years fully absorbing. This was not going to be a rivalry with a clean arc. This was two drivers, separated by a generation, operating at a level Formula One had not encountered since Senna and Prost. And it started here, in these streets, with Alonso refusing to leave a gap that Hamilton for an entire race could not find. 10 defenses, 10 different versions of impossible, and 10 different answers to the same question. Where do I pass? That all arrived at the same place. A betrayal absorbed at racing speed and answered with dignity. 61 laps of precision on a street circuit with no margin for error. A midfield car closing on a Ferrari until 6 laps from the end. Mastery in conditions that made talent irrelevant to everyone except the one driver who treated the rain as information. Aggression calibrated to the exact edge of what the rulebook permits. Psychological occupation of a space that Mansell could see but never reach. Experience deployed as architecture over 11 laps against the most successful driver in the sport's history. 13 laps built corner by corner against the man who held that record before him. 2 laps at Dijon that still exceed the language available to describe them. And a world champion at Monaco, in the year his world was being rearranged, who answered everything asked of him with quiet, total authority. What connects all 10 is not technique, not circuit type, not era of car. It is a decision, made at racing speed, under pressure that most people will never come close to feeling, with something real on the line. The decision not to move. In Formula One, the fastest car usually wins. Usually.